edition of the BPA this week. I'm Jason Gibbs. He's Nick Shook. He's Andrew Gribble. Normally, we would recap the game in a separate BPA and then preview the coming week's game in another BPA later in the week. But this is what happens when you play on Monday night and you fly all night and you don't get home till 6 a.m. and Tuesday is just a debacle all the way through. So what we decided was we would spend a few minutes, and when I say a few minutes, it will only be a few minutes recapping what happened on Monday night, and we will, quote, turn the page, as everyone else and their brother likes to say, and move on to the Seattle Seahawks. Gentlemen, it was a night Monday night. Maybe a night that we want to forget. I would guarantee that the players, coaches, and front office want to forget it and move on as quickly as possible, but not a good night right from the get-go. And the Browns with a tough loss to the San Francisco 49ers to fall back under the 500 mark at 2-3. Gribble, your thoughts on what happened on Monday night?
Well, by margin of victory, it's not your worst loss of the season, but I would say it's by far the worst the team played all season. Because I think in that first game, you had a lot of penalties and some ejection and all sorts of things going wrong, but you at least had some moments that you could glean that you thought the offense and defense played well. And the problem with this game with the 49ers is there's really very little to take positively from either the offense or defense because you didn't really move the ball much at all, only in spurts. Then you had too many turnovers. And then defensively, you got ran over from the very first play. So this was, to me, the worst performance we've seen through the first 5 games, and it's one of those where you don't even really look for silver linings; you just throw it away and hope it never happens again. And I think that's really the only way you can move on from this one because I just didn't see too much to glean positively from it, and I don't think the players did either.
Yeah, I think after that loss to Tennessee in Week 1, there were moments where we could say, well, it was a close game through basically 3 quarters before the wheels fell off. The wheels fell off in this game. Immediately following the interception on the goal line that bounced off of Antonio Callaway's hands. I mean, that was the game-changing play that pretty much sealed their fate. And otherwise, I mean, even Steve Wilks said it today. Gribble said they got ran over, which they absolutely did. Gave up 275 yards of rushing offense. And Steve Wilks called it embarrassing. He was the first one to call it embarrassing, and it was. And the only way you can really, benefit from a loss like that is to take, some sort of lesson from it and then move forward. Yeah,
I think you were down there with me today, all 3 coordinators talking to the media, and every single one of them came in, and it definitely appeared we're given a little slice of humble pie.
Yeah.
Not that they come in with any kind of ego or arrogance or anything along those lines, but I think every one of their departments on this football team underperformed on Monday night, and they're all aware of it. And as Steve Wilks said, the correcting began yesterday on Wednesday, and in earnest, because it does not get any easier this week before the bye week with Seattle coming to town.
And I think that the reason that the outcome was so jarring to maybe everybody who was around the team and those involved with the team as well is because through the first 4 games of the season, you could depend on the defense. You knew that they were going to keep you in the games. You knew that they were going to play disciplined football. They were going to contain the opponent pretty well for the most part. They didn't look anything like that in this game. And Wilks was the first to admit that, that was on him. He said he kind of tried to do a little too much in the game plan and let the last few weeks kind of carry over instead of preparing specifically for that opponent. And he took responsibility for that, which was encouraging, but you hope that they can carry over that lesson and then have a productive game on Sunday because Seattle is no lesser of an opponent than San Francisco is. I mean, they're both coming from the same difficult division, and it's going to be another test for this team.
Yeah, they got a better quarterback. Not as good of a running game, but still a running game that they at least went into the season thinking this was going to be their big focus. But I think Russell Wilson's been playing at a level that you really can't ignore what he's doing through the air, even if they don't have the biggest name wide receivers. But, yeah, this was not the best year to draw the NFC West, especially when you're still figuring things out and you're playing the 3 good teams from that division in the first 6 weeks of the season. But the schedule is what it is. We knew it was going to be tough to begin with. I think it's been even tougher than we anticipated for this team. And it's just one of those situations where I don't know if it's as exactly back against the wall as you were against the Ravens week 4, but this is another one where it's like you don't want to be 2-4, especially with the Patriots.
And then having to go to New England.
Yeah, you don't want to go into that bye week feeling not great. I mean, it's great, especially good that you didn't go into a bye week this week. You want to get back on the field and fix those things. So You just need to see this team respond in a way that they have both week 2 and week 4. Maybe this is an even numbered team so far through the season. You can't be that way all year, but Freddie Kitchens talked about you don't want to be a roller coaster kind of team, but you at least want to go up one more time before you don't want to just keep going down here.
Yeah, I think it was interesting today, all three coaches basically saying it's difficult to mesh. It's a process. It's not something that happens overnight in terms of, all three of those coordinators coming from different backgrounds and working with a first-year head coach. They said, Freddie's been great. Everybody's gotten along, and everybody's on the same page as to what they need to be doing. But it doesn't happen overnight. And then you throw in the first 7 games on this schedule, and it makes it even harder, I think, for everything to come together the way that maybe the fans and even us to a certain degree thought it was going to come together.
Yeah, I think anybody who's ever gone into a new place of employment with different coworkers around them and people they have to work with will agree that it takes time to adjust and figure out how one person works and what somebody likes to do and somebody doesn't like to do and just their own disposition. And that is amplified on a football field because you're placed in this pressure cooker every Sunday or Monday or Thursday. It's a 60-minute pressure cooker where you're going to have to make all these key decisions, and you hope that the players that you've spent the entire week preparing well enough to be able to make those correct decisions, and B, that those players have put in the equivalent or even better effort in preparing themselves to execute. And right now they just haven't been able to put it all together on a weekly basis. We came off of last week where it was the Browns' best game of the season, and we were very confident moving forward. Hey, maybe they finally figured it out. You come back to earth a little bit, so you hope that again, that you take the mistakes that you made in this game, you learn from it, and then you build and keep moving forward, and slowly but surely that process continues to the point where you can finally establish some consistency before it's too late.
The one positive I guess you could take away is the injury bug really didn't bite us in San Francisco, and all 53 guys are on the field practicing this week, Gribbs, including Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams. Kendall Lamb, it'll be interesting to see what his timetable is, but he's back on the field and working out. So a guy that might be able to help this football team at some point here in the coming weeks as well. But all of a sudden you've got a crowded defensive backfield, and you've got guys in Mitchell and TJ Carey who've played pretty well in the absence of Greedy and Denzel.
Yeah, Mitchell and Carey aren't the reasons you guys got ran over this past week. I mean, it was more up front.
Yep.
And I think that they've filled in very well. And it's why when you look at that injury report, the most important one to me is Rashard Higgins. I mean, you saw it was clearly not the best spot for Antonio Callaway to be in coming off the suspension, and he'll be the first to admit he didn't play well. Coaches say he was put in a tough spot, and you need him back in that offense. You need him to be the stabilizer there in the middle of the field and someone that Baker trusts and can maybe get in a rhythm with. Really, the offense hasn't looked good since he went out with an injury after that first half against the Titans. There's been some good moments like in the Ravens game, but overall it's just been inconsistent. So I'm focused on Rashard Higgins, hopefully getting him back on the field. But then I think still if your corners are ready to go, you put them back in there, and you thank Carey and Mitchell for what they've been able to do, and they're going to probably be called on again at some point in the season, and we'll still be doing various capacities. It would be interesting to see the one move that you make if both your corners are back. Does TJ Carey go back to the slot, or do you continue there with Eric Murray, who's played really well as well? I mean, he's been kind of the not talked about guy in this whole mix, but he's done very well at a position that's kind of new to him as well, because he came here as a safety, but he's been playing nickel corner a lot.
Turning the page to the Seattle Seahawks. You said it, Gribbs. It has not been a good year to play the NFC West. I think they're legitimately, you can make the argument, they're going to have 3 teams make the playoffs.
Yeah, as of now, that's what it looks like.
But Seattle, very, very talented. In their last 50 road games, they're 32-19-1. Pete Carroll is their coach. Not a Pete Carroll guy, but Pete Carroll has done a heck of a job coaching that football team. And it's amazing the transformation that team has made from the Legion of Boom to now being a little more offensive-centric, but yet still having a good enough defense to win you some football games.
It was strange because last year was their transitional year, and I didn't anticipate them making the playoffs. I had them finishing at 7-9, and they ended up squeaking into the playoffs. And, credit goes to Pete Carroll and his staff and how they can, kind of get the most out of their guys. And now that they've been through that transitional year, it looks like they're trending back upward. I'm more interested, though, to investigate why Jason Gibbs doesn't like Pete Carroll.
That's for another time, and not in front of the camera.
I mean, it's 5 weeks, but if the voting was today, Russell Wilson's probably your MVP of the season. I mean, he's playing at an extremely high level, doing it with a rookie wide receiver and an undersized guy in Tyler Lockett, who's become a legitimate number one for them, and a tight end that no one heard of going into the season in Will Dissly. So I mean, he has really elevated that team. And last year they really focused on running the ball with Chris Carson, Rashad Penny, a bunch of others. They're still running the ball, but not at the level that you might have anticipated this year. I think that part of that is Wilson, and other parts Chris Carson keeps fumbling the ball. So you play to your strengths, and this team's strength is by far Russell Wilson. Also on defense, you got gifted Jadeveon Clowney before the season, and that's a pretty nice piece to add to your defense, which I think is good, not great. They've had the last couple games, I mean, they allowed a bunch of points to the Rams. They allowed a bunch of points to the Steelers, even with Mason Rudolph at quarterback in that game. So they can be scored on. It's just a matter of slowing down the hottest guy in the NFL right now.
Russell Wilson has not thrown an interception so far through 5 games.
12-0 touchdown ratio.
That's pretty impressive. And I thought it was interesting what Steve Wilks had to say today in his press conference. Wilson doesn't like to run the football. Wilson will scramble in the pocket or get out of the pocket, but not necessarily take off and run. He's just scrambling to give his wide receivers more time to get open. And I think that will be a big challenge for our linebackers and the secondary on Sunday.
Yeah, usually he's running if they're losing. I mean, that's usually when you see him run more is when they're trailing, and he's the guy that, like when Odell Beckham wants to go out there and return a punt, Russell Wilson's the guy that starts running, and that's when their offense usually gets out of sync. I mean, so they are better when he's throwing the ball effectively. I just think they're a good team, and I think honestly their worst game of the season might have been when they played the Bengals week 1 and had to squeak by with a close victory in that one, and they didn't score very much, and the Bengals popped them for some big plays. They've been a lot better ever since then, and then the Saints came into their house and really stunned them defensively. But otherwise, they've been playing really good football, and they've beaten some good teams.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to containing Russell Wilson obviously is number one, but number two is forcing them to throw the football and then be prepared to defend that, because they do have some unproven guys in their receiving core. Tyler Lockett is really an up-and-coming player. DK Metcalf's a rookie who's having a very good season so far, and Will Dissly.
Big plays, though.
Yeah, big plays.
He's not making a lot of plays, but when he does, they're big ones.
Right, which is what he did in college as well. And then tight end Will Dissly has really come on in his second year and seems to be a viable option as a tight end, and that's something that Seattle has used for years is taking advantage of those good tight ends. But I think it comes down to, can you limit them in the rushing attack? And it sounds like it's the same thing every week, but Chris Carson is still top 15 in the NFL in rushing right now. So, he's averaging 76 yards per game. He's got a stat line that falls right in line with Derrick Henry. He's obviously not as big as Derrick Henry is, but the Browns did a pretty good job against him, way back in week 1, except for that big screen pass. So if you can do something similar to that and then contain Wilson, who is obviously much better than Marcus Mariota was, then maybe you'll find yourself in a game like that. It just comes down to limiting those mistakes and doing what they didn't do against San Francisco, which starts with setting the edge and really playing disciplined football and maintaining your gap integrity, which is what they got completely out of last week, and they looked completely lost and on their heels for most of the game as a result.
All right, that is a quick recap of the 49ers game and a look at the Seattle Seahawks for our keys and our player interview as we get ready for Browns and Seahawks. Log on to wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the best podcast available, or log on to clevelandbrowns.com. You can listen to all the previous best podcast availables here this season. Joe Schobert, Christian Kirksey, a number of guys that have joined us here week in and week out. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you for watching. Again, for the rest of this podcast, log on to wherever you get your podcast and subscribe today to the best podcast available. For Andrew Gribble,